So we travel into Black Africa to learn the story of the Nile Valley, a story generally told from Egypt. Today we're going to tell the story from a place that thrived before Egypt, alongside Egypt, and after Egypt.
The lands to the south of Egypt, generally called Nubia, had 5 important golden ages. The first golden age, which was called Tarseti, some people call that, in translation, the land of the bow. This civilization was older than First Dynasty Egypt by about 200 years.
They also domesticated animals here first and before Egypt, so pastoralism was very important. Depending on how far back, if you say 9,000 years ago, then you can say yes, it was probably more developed than Egypt. But starting from the 4th millennium BC, the center really is in Egypt and develops from there.
Sudan was often ahead of Egypt in terms of developing technology because it had perhaps a smaller population. In Egypt, there's not much need for human economy. You don't need to save on human labor because every time the Nile flooded in midsummer, you had a huge reservoir of human labor as long as you were feeding them a living wage.
The ancient Egyptians themselves said that they came from the south of Kemet, ancient Egypt, which is further up, higher up the Nile Valley, closer to the source. And they identified the mountains of the moon, which are in modern-day Uganda, as their place of origin.
Most historians now accept, even the European Eurocentric ones, that it is the movement of the peoples from the south to the north that gave birth to Kemet. However, what they fail to recognize that is not just the movement of these one set of Africans traveling from the south to the north, but also movements of other Africans coming from the west to the east. They met and collected together in what is now Kemet. That's why that civilization was so powerful, because it was a multicultural expression of the African experience. It was several sets of different Africans coming together in one place and creating a civilization.
We travel through Sudan, the largest country in Africa, to learn about a world that was already old before our world had even begun. The ancient land once known as Tarseti, Kerma, and Kush, home to the Nubians. This is a place where early Europeans came to study and learn from Africans, and to study from the oldest people in the world, Africans.
So when you hear recent discussions on who were the black pharaohs, referring in particular to the Nubian pharaohs or the Cushitic pharaohs, those pharaohs they often call black pharaohs in a way to try and distinguish them from the others, but they can't be, because as we said, all the early dynastic and intermediate pharaohs were black.
This is home to the world's oldest recorded religion, a place whose kingship and political system continued to bring harmony and prosperity to its people for over 3,000 years. Today, Sudan is the largest country in Africa, rich in oil and other natural resources, but a country culturally split by the Arab African North and the African South. In recent times, this country has been greatly affected by civil wars and droughts. This is a place where the great Blue and White Nile meet to form the famous River Nile that runs through Egypt. This is an amazing land that predates Egypt, but for many is just another part of our world's hidden history. The question is, what happened? What was this ancient civilization about, and what left it in ruin? Why do we only know the story of the Nile Valley from Egypt? And why do we think that Egypt is somewhere separate from Africa? What do we still have and use today that was connected to this time period? We're going to peel back the pages of time and find out. I'm standing here on ancient holy ground, in an area that was once part of the Napatan Kingdom. Today this place is known as Jebel Barkal, which is an Arabic term that means holy mountain. It goes by this term because in ancient times, for over 1,000 years, this area was the Kemetic and Kushite religious center of the world. Home to the Nubians, ancient Egyptians, and other traveling Africans.
Jebel Barkal is a very important site both in the history of Kush and in the history of Egypt, or Kemet if you prefer. The mountain had a particular shape, and both the Egyptians and the Kushites regarded this mountain as the holy mountain. That's what the Egyptians called it, the holy mountain.
So at Jebel Barkal you have this great ritual religious complex which is set up in a monumental form that we see first when the ruler of Kemet conquers it, when Thutmose III is building his great temple there, and then it continues, and it's in that area that Napata is.
The city of Napata becomes a very important capital during this golden age of Kush. The site has a long history. We can trace it back to the 18th dynasty period of ancient Egypt, where the ancient Egyptians saw it as sacred to their deity Amen.
Really remarkable point in the landscape, and again you have to be in the landscape, or you have to have the photograph of the landscape to understand how different it is and why it attracts attention. And people have different theories about that, but they don't tell us. They just call it the Juwa'ab, and they saw there a certain kind of form of sacredness.
So the influence of the Sudanese Nubians in Egypt is quite clear, but on the other hand, the influence of the Egyptians themselves in traditions, in religion, is still people having different minds of is it originated from there, or is it been acquired or adopted as gods by the Nubians.
So here at Jebel Barkal, in between Upper Kemet and Lower Nubia, we find much shared culture. And there's much debate around whether it started deep in Africa, at the heart of the Nile, and spread upwards, or if it started in the north of Africa, at the bottom of the Nile, and spread down into Africa.
We must have in mind that these political borders were not there.
But the boundaries were constantly shifting in any case, and there'd always been a lot of trade between these two separate states, if you like.
When you talk about Lower and Upper Nubia, you're talking about a span of land where people have got blood relations, and they have got some sort of culturation and acculturation always happening there.
There'd always been a very strong relationship, and to me, the more I look at the cultures from these two separate states, the more similar they actually become. And I think we need to try and move away from some of the images that we see that show Nubia in particular as a very different country. We know for a fact that, as I've said, there was a lot of trade between the two, and that also many of the people would move across the borders effectively over time. So there's always a very strong, close relationship, and at certain times, you know, they were the same thing. They were just one.
It's like the relationship between America and England. England is the mother and father of America. The population of America are predominantly English American. The presidents of America are English American. Even though America is an expression of the European consciousness, the vast majority of people are European, the predominant power is the heritage that England has given it. The Americans acknowledge this. They trace their lineage, if they can, back to England and come back to here. The relationship is a special relationship of power. Though America has power on this earth, England is its mother and father and recognized as such. That is precisely the way that one should look at the relationship between Kemet and Nubia.